Hello everyone. Welcome to Back to Basics. Today we'll be covering Pythagorean theorem. So what exactly is Pythagorean theorem? Well, Pythagorean theorem is an equation that relates the three side lengths of a right angled triangle. These two triangles over here are right angle triangles because one of their angles is equivalent to 90 degrees. This square box over here indicates that the angle is 90 degrees. Now, to be able to use this equation effectively, we have to first locate our hypotenuse. So what exactly is a hypotenuse? Well, it is the longest side length of the right angled triangle. However, we cannot always visually see the hypotenuse. So another system to be able to locate this hypotenuse is that it is always opposite to the right angle itself. So for example, this angle C over here is directly opposite to our side length C. Now let's go ahead and label our triangles, because in math we aren't always restricted to A, B, and C. So we can have things or variables such as G, H, and L. Now we have labeled our angles. Let's label our side. So we can always put things like D or S or J. However, this system of labeling is obviously very confusing and it will easily lead to errors when you're using equations. So another system that we can use is, as you can see, I've labeled the angles with capital letters, then labeling each side a lowercase letter of the angle it is opposite to. So what I mean is this angle over here, angle L, is opposite to the side length of D, which I have labeled. So let's change this to a lowercase l. Now I will be doing that to all the other sides. Now let's find our hypotenuse. Now the hypotenuse, as I mentioned, is always the longest side length. However, we can also find the hypotenuse by knowing that it will always be opposite to the right angle. So the angle H is the right angle, thus side length lowercase h will be the hypotenuse because it is opposite to the right angle. Now, how do we actually put this within our Pythagorean theorem? Because this theorem obviously uses variables. However, these variables can be changed. So the side of the equation with one variable is where you would always put the hypotenuse that has one variable in it. So for example, c squared is the right side of the equation and it only has one variable within that side. So that is where our hypotenuse will be. So instead of putting c squared, we can put h squared as our hypotenuse. Now, the other side of the equation, which has two variables, which represent the two sides that are not our hypotenuse. Now we know that our hypotenuse is always opposite to the right angle, so that's why the side length of L plus G will always not be our hypotenuse. So this is how our equation will look in terms of this triangle over here. Now let's go to more practical examples with numbers. So the first thing over here, let's look at this top one, is let's label our variables. So I will label this X, Y, and Z. Now let's label our sides. Now we know that angle Z, the side opposite to angle Z, is 23. So let's set Z, or lowercase z, as 23, and lowercase x equal to 12. Now let's locate our hypotenuse, which is directly opposite to the right angle, which in this case would be y. So the side length that is directly opposite to y is this one over here. So let's put that as our hypotenuse. Let's give it a variable, so it'll be a lowercase y. So how do we actually use this equation to be able to find for the missing hypotenuse? Because that's the final side that we have to locate. Utilizing this equation, let's build a one that relates to this triangle over here, instead of using just a squared plus b squared equals c squared, because we obviously do not have those variables here. So, as I mentioned before, the hypotenuse will always have one variable on the side of the equation, which in this case is c squared. So let's put y squared as the hypotenuse. Then the other two side lengths are of course not the hypotenuse, because we already know the hypotenuse is y squared. So let's put them on the other side of the equation. So we can now input in our values of 23 and 12. So let's just do that. Y squared is equal to 23 squared plus 12 squared. Now let's isolate for y, because that is the variable that we want to solve for. So let's do opposite operations. Let's square root this side to get rid of the square, and then we have to square root the other side. Now, you can obviously put this entire equation into a calculator, but sometimes the teacher would want you to show steps. So we will begin by multiplying 23 times 23 plus 12 times 12, which gives us 673. Let's double check. That's correct. And now that is our answer in exact numbers. This essentially means that there are no decimal points. However, if your teacher would want decimal points, then you would simply just square root 673, which gives us 25.94. Obviously, if your teacher would want 5 decimal spaces or just 1, then you would act accordingly and add those numbers. In this case, it will be 2, 2, 4. However, if your teacher would want exact values, you would just leave it like this, the square root of 673. Now, let's move on to a different example where we already have our hypotenuse. So in this case, let's first, like I said, label all of our angles and side lengths. I will label them as C, B, and A. So the angle C is directly opposite to this side length. So I'll label this as a lowercase c. And then I'll do the same for the rest. So now, to fill in all of our side lengths, we have to find for C. So what does C equal, which is our missing variable? However, you cannot simply just put all of these variables in because of this equation over here. We actually have to build our equation based on the variables of this triangle that we have over here. So let's do it where our hypotenuse is the opposite of our right angle over here. So that'll be b. So let's put b squared by itself. Now let's fill in for the rest, which will be c squared plus a squared. it doesn't really matter if you put a squared plus c squared or c squared plus a squared. They're all the same. As long as you don't mix up the hypotenuse and accidentally put the hypotenuse in for the side with two variables, because we have already determined that this is our hypotenuse. So let's just rearrange to solve for c squared. So it'll be b squared minus a squared equals to c squared, utilizing opposite operations, of course. Minus a squared over here. And then let's square root both sides to be able to isolate for c. B squared minus a squared. Now, let's plug in our variables. B squared, we have 14 squared minus 5 squared gives us c. So you can obviously put all of this into a calculator and then call it a day. However, I'll do it step by step. So this is 196 minus 25 is equal to c. Now this will be the square root of 171 is equal to c. And if your teacher would want you to put it in exact values, which means there are no decimals, you would just leave it as this. But if your teacher would want decimals, you would square root 171, which gives you 13.077. It really depends on how many decimal spaces your teacher would want. Of course, always clarify beforehand. So this will be it. We have a couple of questions that you are able to work on over here. Have a wonderful day.